guess I'll just go away.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first of two Florida Prize panels. I'm David Madison. I'm the Associate Curator of Education and Outreach at the museum, and I have the pleasure of welcoming our moderator this evening. Hansen Mulford is our Chief Curator at the museum, and he is the man behind the magic of our Florida Prize in Contemporary Art. Thank you, Hansen, for agreeing to moderate.
Thank you very much, David. So we're here to talk to three artists that are in the Florida Prize in Contemporary Art this year. Sara Stites, Francie Bishop Good, and Jared McGriff. And we're going to start off with a little slideshow for each artist and an opportunity to talk a little bit about the work that's in the exhibition. And then maybe in the end, we can take some questions, if there are any, about the work, and maybe do a little questions, some questions as we conversationally as we go along. That'd be great. So let me share my screen. Can everybody see that screen all right? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So our first artist is Francie Bishop Good. Francie received a BFA from University of Colorado and a master's from the Florida Atlantic University. She has twice been the recipient of the South Florida Cultural Consortium Fellowship, also a recipient of the State of Florida Individual Artist Fellowship. She's had solo shows at the Allentown Art Museum, the Fort Lauderdale Art Museum, Museum of Contemporary Art in Jacksonville, and the Art and Culture Center in Hollywood. She's represented by Mindy Solomon Gallery in Miami. She has work in the collections of the MFA in Boston, the Wadsworth Anthonam, the Frost Art Museum in Florida International University, Bass Art Museum, and the, I guess I said the Fort Lauderdale Art Museum. She's based in Fort Lauderdale, by the way, too. So welcome, Francie, are you there? Unmute.
Hi, Hansen, thank you.
So I'm going to show a few of this, some slides or visuals that from our current exhibition. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that's in the show. And all right, we can have a conversation about it.
Okay.
If it works. Why doesn't it work? Okay. Oops, there it goes. Something else.
Oops,
Okay, start with that.
nice.
My button wasn't working. So this is a sort of an overall view of the installation in the exhibition with your work in it. Do you want to talk a little bit about the installation? I don't think it's kind of interesting.
Sure. Hansen did this incredible layout. Your idea was terrific with this long table. How long is it, Hansen?
About 20 feet.
Yeah, that would hold the sculptures. And I was very intrigued with that. That was exciting. And it pulls the, they show sort of as one. So the stand really makes it. The other part, the two shelves, those are my pairings. And I think from what I'm hearing, that is what is making me unique, is that I pair the sculptures with the paintings. And this happens very intuitively. So, and then on the right side is my giant pinch pot, which I've done 3 of, and paintings. What else should I say?
Okay, that's good. It was, you know, I really enjoyed being able to work on the installation. I think it had some real great possibilities for a presentation and including all of the work, I think, in this kind of somewhat wonderful, kind of pleasantly chaotic tabletop display. I think it was reflects the sort of the fun and quirkiness of the sculptures, I think. Go on to so these are our individual paintings.
Right, and I think it might be interesting to note that I work on the paintings in the same sort of technique, not that there is a technique really, as I work on with the sculptures. So I do layer upon layer, and then I rinse them after I paint them. They seem to get rinsed off until I like what I see, and I do the same thing with the sculptures. So I paint with vinyl paint and acrylic paint, and I rinse it off, and then it just is layer upon layer until something emerges that is, to me, fresh.
Yeah, I didn't realize there were rinsed off. That makes a lot of sense. They're very transparent.
So you get the feeling of watercolor and also some transparencies and some not transparencies. I really like that push and pull. I think Sara does also.
Right. Yeah, so this is a 3-panel piece that's on the wall there, and see, and this is kind of close up of some of the pots, ceramic pieces. And these are bisqueware, fired bisqueware that are then painted with acrylic paint.
Right.
So
right, washed off, and some pieces have ink. Some have other materials like some blocks, some beads. I try to have fun with them, be fresh, and I really work in the moment. I don't have an idea where it's going. I might know a size, but to me, that's the exciting thing about art is what happens in the process. So I'm really a process-based artist. Reacting to, I react to my life, to the life around us, to all the crazy things that go on, but it sort of goes through me and out.
Yeah, and you started with the clay. We're working with ceramics without any prior training or instruction. You just kind of got some clay and a kiln and started doing things.
Yes, yes. and it's I mean, I since the time I started, I've read extensively about it, and I'm trying to learn more all the time. But most pottery I find very tight, and that was not my interest. My interest is sculpture and being able to push and pull the media, just like the paintings.
You know, one thing that I was thought about recently when in thinking about your ceramics and your painting and your abstract work, and of course there's de Kooning did these wonderful sculptures in the 70s of the clam diggers, which are kind of remarkably similar in some ways.
Well, that's a really nice compliment. I love those pieces.
Yeah.
Those are gorgeous.
Yeah,
And
they are.
it would be nice to see some of these small pieces made really large, like my giant pinch pot.
Right.
And also I respond to not typical color.
Right. Yeah, so, and many of them have, whereas the paintings seem pretty much abstract, these do have some figurative or representational qualities to them.
Oh, there's no question. They are like little beings.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really are. And then the exciting part is putting the painting and the sculptures together. And that's a real challenge, but when they work, I think they sing. To me, they do.
Yeah, right.
But putting them on the two shelves was challenging, because when I walked in there, I said, "Oh my God, this looks like a flea market." But I think I was a little discouraged. But when it did all come together because of the stacking, and it takes a little while, but it was fun. And I thank you so much, Hansen.
Well, yeah, I was just trying to really emulate what I saw in your own studio and your home.
Right.
To some degree. Well, actually, what's behind you right there.
Yeah, I can't see me, but I can see the slides.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right, it's behind me, but yours looks a lot better.
Okay. Yeah, our juror too is very complimentary about these works, so I thought they were really exciting.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Kind of close up. And some of these are done on over photographs.
Right, some of them, because I'm not a purist in any way, so I had canvases that were digital photographs and also digital imagery that I would do over them. I had series for maybe 10 years, and I just painted over it. And sometimes you can see some of the imagery through, but it doesn't matter. It's just a start. My history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, here these pieces particularly look like, you know, so objects,
Right.
art objects, or little vessels with some kind of strange vegetation poking out of them.
Yeah,
cups.
vegetation or phallic. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Both.
Both, yes.
Here we have a pinch pot up near the foreground.
Right, the giant pinch pot. That's fun. I'm glad you included that.
Yeah, they're kind of delightful, a delightful kind of variation in the whole thing.
Yeah, it does.
So anyway, I just wanted to, I think that's the end of that section. And I know you told a story, which I think is kind of interesting for those who haven't heard it, that your mother was an interior decorator and had these little vignettes around the house.
Oh, yeah. That's I think where the pairing started. She always had like a painting behind books, and then a tchotchke or something in front of it. And it was always these odd combinations. And I think that's really where it came from, the pairings. Right. You know, it was always one had to go in front of the next, and everything was at weird objects. There were paintings and objects in the bathroom. And I think it was a strong influence.
Sure, yeah. Makes sense. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
So next we have Jared McGriff. Jared was born in Los Angeles, California, went to school at the College of Environmental Design at University of California in Berkeley. He has an MBA from New York University. And somewhere along the line, he's been painting. It just seemed it was an interesting part of the story, I guess, too. And then he came down, I believe, you can correct me, but I believe he came down to Miami fairly recently, maybe 2017 or something like that. He's had works exhibited nationally at George Washington University, the Gantz Center in North Carolina, the Museum of Art at Fort Lauderdale. His work is in collections of the Museum of Art in Fort Lauderdale, the Rubell Museum, and the ICA in Miami. He's represented by Spinello Projects in Miami, and he's had several one-person exhibitions there. Hello, Jared.
Hey, how are you, Hansen? Thanks for hosting this session.
Yeah. So this is a installation view of the exhibition with your works in it. I make a very dramatic presentation. I mean, a really huge work in the middle of it. Could you talk a little bit about, I guess, some of the paintings we're looking at?
Sure. So these works are representative of my practice in that they're imagined portraits based in imagined environments. So that's really kind of the basis of my work, is kind of dealing with these pieces, kind of like Francie mentioned. I mean, these pieces kind of show up as reflections of my I guess the state of mind on that day. I don't plan anything out when I start. It kind of starts with line and mark making, and the images kind of develop from there, the figures and the landscapes. I like to kind of think about, how people relate to each other and their environments, and kind of the meanings of small gestures and moments, and kind of depict that in works.
And so there's usually not a lot of dramatic action, a lot of literal narrative. It's kind of, there tend to be kind of quiet moments, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the works are kind of, they come definitely through these contemplative, almost meditative states. So I think the work reflects that in a way. There's definitely an opportunity for the viewer to question the dialogue, and then maybe even create their own internal dialogue in this sort of interaction around who these figures might be, or what they might be thinking or saying, the spaces that they're within. So it's, this idea around thinking about memory and imagination and place, but also considering the moment and the gesture. So that's what, kind of this work reflects. And I think there's a lot of aspects of like sentiment and experience that people think that these works represent. So I think it's really cool that to hear different people's, meaning and kind of how people see these images.
Yeah, they seem to have a very ambiguous qualities to them in terms of the representation of the figures and the environments. They're simplified, and of course the faces are kind of, particularly the eyes are not detailed. They're kind of generalized in a way. So as you say, you kind of there's a lot of room to project into them.
Yeah, exactly. I think this idea around, defining ambiguity is a important part of life. And I think the work, forces that in ways. There's a almost requirement to think about, what is actually happening with a particular figure or an expression. And in that, that exercise of figuring something out, I think the viewer has to take some steps around what that might mean to them and kind of question their own perception. So this idea around, prompting folks to think about how they perceive things is definitely a part of my practice. And it's something that, I think is interesting and challenging, on a personal level. But it's, a place where there's a lot of growth and experience. So I'm super, interested in doing that.
Do you usually work on a number of paintings at the same time?
Yeah, exactly. I do. I work these two pieces behind me. I'm working on at the same time. I work on I'm not going to show the camera the rest of the studio. This is kind of a mess, but there's pieces behind me on the floor as I work on. I start the work on the floor, and that's where I do most. That's where I do most of the work, and then depending on space, I'll put it on the wall to complete. But yeah, I'm always working on something. Like you can kind of see, like a piece behind me on the floor.
Right, sure.
So yeah.
So in order to maintain that ambiguity or that sort of that opening for interpretation, it requires you to know when to stop painting, right, on a piece.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's certainly a challenge. I think if I don't stop, then I have to kind of go through another cycle, if you will. I think that's a part of making harmony of mark making and abstraction is around understanding the balance within the piece itself and letting the rules of the piece kind of play out. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge to stop sometimes.
Can I ask? I mean, your style, is really completely original to me, but I kind of feel like it might reference self-taught artists or some kind of expressionistic thing, but I don't know, outsider art kind of style. Is that just me thinking, or is that real? Anything real in that?
I think it's real because I'm not, I didn't go to art school. So the work, I think, it's not, from a technique standpoint, it's of my own. I mean, there's work that I see and I like. I like work that speaks to me from in terms of what is the line doing. I learned a lot about form and space and kind of thinking spatially and storytelling and architecture school. I definitely bring that to the paintings, but from a technique standpoint, yeah, it's definitely you could call it like an outsider art or this figurative abstraction. What I'm attempting to do is kind of tell stories in unique ways, make people see the beauty in things they may not have, question their perspective, see the figure blend into the space, think about permeability between themselves and the environment. Like, these are all things that I'm always thinking about, and I think it kind of creates this style of kind of choppy and raw.
Yeah, right. It feels that way. Very purposeful. purposefully done.
Yeah, for sure.
I think you're also one of 3 artists in the exhibition that didn't actually go to art school, interestingly enough.
Oh, cool. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, anyway. This is a beautiful painting too. The floor is just, fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I like to think about, light all the time, how to, what's it, yeah, and how light frames space. So that's where a lot of the kind of, I call them shadows. I don't know what, what they might be, but
Yeah.
so blocks of color kind of melting into each other, things like
Right.
that. Yeah.
Sure. I think it's our last picture. Is this like just like a character study?
Yeah, kind of like thinking about a person in space and being in light, kind of a light of her own, some kind of spotlight, maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's definitely, just thinking about a figure in space and
Yeah.
thinking about, multiple angles at presenting multiple angles at one time in one frame.
Yeah. Is there any particular reason why some have backgrounds and some don't? Is it just what you felt like at the moment, or?
Yeah, I think that, I think there's like, I'm always thinking about kind of zooming in and zooming out. And sometimes when I think about, a work like this, I'm just thinking about the light maybe at a moment in time. And if we were to zoom out, we would see, more of these expansive backgrounds. But at that moment in time, it's kind of a, closer, a view of the figure in a flash of light. So it's, there's no definite reason why there's some have that more detailed background than others. It's definitely about stopping, to your earlier point. I mean, if the figure comes first,
right,
and the initial mark making and lines, create that figure, then sometimes that's just kind of how I stop, because it's just the figure and light. Whereas a lot of times when I start the paintings with the line and mark making is kind of, for some reason, it's generating a background or a landscape or an environment. And then I start there. So it's kind of this, idea about, how things start to appear with the initial marks as well.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you very much. I
Sure.
appreciate those insights.
Appreciate it.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next artist. Well, we won't actually. The last picture. I think this is one of your newest pictures too, I think, Jared.
Well, this is one of, for sure, in general of this body. I think it might have been done earlier than some of the works in there,
Okay.
but it's around the same time period. Yeah, and this is body as landscape. I think about that a lot as well.
Okay, right.
Sure.
Right, good, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to introduce Sara Stites. And Sara received a BFA from Syracuse University and an MFA from Pratt Institute. She's based in Miami, also lives in Maine, and exhibits quite a bit in both locations, at the Hollywood Art and Culture Center, the Under the Bridge, Art at Work zones, and the Center for Maine Contemporary Art in Rockland, or just some of the places that she's had recent exhibitions. So welcome, Sara.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good.
So this is our big installation of your work in the Florida Prize. exhibition, and this is one of our sort of slightly curved wall. It's not an optical illusion. It's actually has a slight curve to it. It's about 90 feet, and it's I think a wonderful panoramic display. The wall color, just I have to note, is really a lavender. It's a pale lavender, and it looks a little blue here. But it's really a beautiful color that sets the work apart, I think, within the gallery.
It really was good. I like how the yellows bounce off the purple.
Yeah.
It made them really sparky.
Mhm.
It was good for the color. It was nice to see my work on a colored wall like that.
Right. Yeah, we sort of played around with a number of different colors initially,
Right.
which I think were interesting. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
think this one was just nice. It didn't distract from the rest of the
Right.
works, which are basically very colorful.
Right.
So you work on is it Yupa paper? Is that-
All of these, this was a series that's taken me several years, and I did them all on Yupo paper with oil paint.
okay.
But I do start, a lot of them I start with inks and just kind of create space on the floor, because the Yupo paper is very, it can really take a lot of different media. So sometimes I do that. I just create a space and then put them up on the wall. And it usually starts with some sort of reaction to the space, to the ink. And then I move along from there, building toward the viewer from the underpainting to, layering stuff forward.
So where do the sort of cartoonish images come from, or what's the source of that, or style, or how did that come about?
Well, I work in notebooks all the time. I'm always drawing in notebooks. And before this, I actually I couldn't really figure out how to get those images from my notebooks into my paintings. And I never worked from them. And then with this series, I decided to actually just add some of those characters into the painting. And so they're just kind of like sketches that I make whenever I sit down, to talk on the phone, or I just do them all the time. They're kind of cartoonish. I think I do like those Disney drawings that they made for the movies, when you see the individual cells.
Yeah.
I've always really thought those drawings were beautiful. I wasn't really trying to emulate them. They just kind of came out of me, but I do always have been drawing for a long time, and the color is more recent.
I mean, some of them, like the one on the left, there seems to be like a face that's connected to the hind part of a horse or a donkey, and there are some mythological characters. Is there any kind of?
Not really mythological, but that horse was there from the very beginning, and went through a lot of changes, but I kept that hind part and that little figure on the back. And but then I couldn't complete it, but when I finally put that one face in the middle, I thought of her as Babar's aunt from the story about Babar. And something about that completed the picture. So, and I don't know what that big other character is. It's kind of a half monkey, half human.
Right.
It just emerged.
Okay.
I like to try and make things react to each other in a way with the color and even with the form, so that there's kind of a sharpness, a clarity to it.
Yeah, I think that in particular, like in this group here, the painting in the middle and the one on the left, they really verge off into abstraction, but then obviously there's some legs in there,
Yeah,
some other body parts, but they're really almost completely abstracted, which I
yeah.
think feels very current.
The one on the right, that figure bending over, that's taken directly from a notebook. But the one on the left, the piece on the left, I almost completely did that without any notebook. But the red figure in the background, that was in a notebook also.
Okay, right. And these
Yeah.
are just suspended on the wall, I believe with tape, some kind of super tape. Is that right?
Yeah, and
Kind of floated on the wall.
floated on the wall on foam core.
Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking about space all the time, and the horizontal and vertical patches of color they're partly creating space and making you think that there's space in front of the characters. And then I think there's kind of a humorous aspect to them where
Yeah.
I'm joking around a little bit like this was really serious kind of emotional stuff, but I'm just kidding. It's just a painting.
Mhm.
I think it has something to do with humor.
Yeah. Yeah, this one on the left, there seemed to be almost like a gnome-like character at the top there.
Yeah, that figure changed many times. That pink leg, that was much more connected to it at one point, but it's
Mhm.
kind of part of it.
Yeah. And then this one again on the left, these are almost like surrealistic sculptural forms.
Well, that one on the left is called Survival of the Artist.
Okay.
And the last thing I put in, there's always this one last thing that is a surprise and I think the surprise here was that log falling through the air.
Yeah.
That it took some bravery for me to put it on there, and it just seems to somehow make the painting come together
Right.
and be more exciting.
Yeah, it's kind of a foreground element that floats in the air.
Yeah. They always seem to need at least one thing that's right in the foreground that
Right.
challenges the whole picture.
Yeah. And you've also been doing sculptures too, right? We don't have any in the exhibitions.
Yes, I've been doing sculptures, and then I do these, I also take photographs using my paintings with
Right.
stuff in front of them.
Yeah.
Parts of the paintings.
And so in earlier, you were just working completely in black and white, and then just a few years ago, you started adding the color.
Yeah, there's the color it was really a result of looking at the flowers in my garden in Maine, because they're just so bright and so shocking compared to the surroundings. And so I just got into the color, but I kind of always have liked some version of the primaries reacting to each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, here this bird looks very much like a kind of Looney Tune character.
But it's looking at everything like, I don't take you that seriously.
Okay.
That big abstract form. I don't really.
Oh yeah. Right.
Yeah. What are you talking about?
Yeah, the abstract form is kind of a cartoon of an abstraction.
Right. Yeah. At first I felt like I had to keep that form pretty flat. And then I just decided that I could it doesn't matter. So I just kind of went into making it a little more cartoony.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the end of the slideshow.
Well, thanks. I certainly loved seeing them all up on that lavender wall.
Well, great. Yeah, it worked out beautifully. David, are you around?
I'm here. I'm here.
We have any questions? I'm not from anybody in the audience.
No, but if anyone wants to post in the Q&A, I had a question that maybe you all could talk about in terms of narrative and like as you're creating, what types of stories you're telling. I know Jared, you kind of touched on that a little bit, and Sara as well, I think with all of your different characters. Yeah, I was just wondering if maybe you could build on that, all three of you.
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, so I was thinking about the narratives or stories that you tell while you're creating in terms of the process. It sounded like each of you kind of drift into different ways of storytelling in terms of I thought Sara did a really nice job of touching on that in terms of the characters that you're building and what does narrative look like in terms of your process, I guess. And I'm sorry, I totally am off camera. There I am. Hi.
How do I get back
Well,
to
for
the?
me, I would say the narrative has to be there. The story has to be there for me to feel like the work is complete. But it's it is, I think, like each other of the other artists, it's very, it's a narrative that isn't completely easy to read. It's there, but the viewer has to take some chances and spend some time relating to it in their own way. And I think mine is like, I think of narrative usually as linear. And I think it's more like, for me, it's more like back to forward. It's a linear, in space, from far away from you coming closer. That's how I see it, as a linear narrative for me.
Sure. Well, that's similar to what Jared was saying about in terms of the viewer being able to fill in the ambiguities within these pieces. But Jared, could you build a little bit more on like narrative and storytelling too?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar. For me, it's very similar to what Sara mentioned. I mean, there's I think there are some works where I am specific, where I think like, okay, this is telling me something, in this personal way. But rarely am I communicating that in a structured way. Every painting, I'm still stopping at, is there a story here? Okay, and then that's where I stop in a way. It's like, if I can tell, it's like, like if a jazz musician does a solo and they realize that, the phrase is completed, wherein the first note and the last note have create a cohesive moment. That's kind of that's the narrative, and that's where the stopping point is, and that's kind of how I look at it as well.
Do you start with character? Do you really start with character, Jared? Is that kind of the beginning point, or okay? No,
there's I think there's some pieces in the back of my mind where it's like I do want to depict, like I have a piece that's at the ICA now where it's like, policemen sort of, maybe they are policemen in my mind, but they could be something else, and they're kind of in a also another ambiguous background. So the piece, I did intentionally create that work to communicate that aspect, but it was more of a prompt to get the viewer to kind of put together what position that figure might have in space and in society even. So it's, conceptually, most of the time I'm not starting there, I'm starting with the line and then letting the line kind of lead me to the next piece, the next move, and then kind of building from there, kind of, you know, letting the painting paint the story versus me kind of like putting a narrative like, oh, this person is this and they're doing that and they move here. You know, it's more about,
Okay.
you know, how do these lines kind of put together this ambiguity that builds tension to communicate something that a person will resonate with.
Sure. I see Sarah nodding too, but I think that's a very similar process actually in terms of the way.
I love the jazz, the way that you mentioned the music, because it is true. The solo starts, it wanders, it goes all around, and then somehow it makes it back again, and then it's completed. And that resonates with me a lot.
Me too. That's really interesting. With my work, I listen to jazz all day long. And WBGO in Newark, that's my station. It's interesting. I come from a long history of jazz, but my work is sort of the opposite of narrative. It's more secrets. I feel like I'm telling secrets, and if my work now gets too narrative, I sort of destroy it, push it back. I'm not sure why, but it is. The narrative's quiet, but it is there.
It's so interesting to me that you say that though, Francie, because when I interact with your work, I want to start telling stories about some of these objects. And like, I mean, that is kind of the gift that all of you give us, is that space of ambiguity for the viewer to explore. But especially when I come to your work, I guess that's kind of the root of non-objectivity in general, but I want to make sense of these forms. And so I often look at it and I'll see a landscape or some sort of figure, and it takes me to a narrative space. It takes me to a storytelling space. And so anyway, I think that's really fascinating though, that you would destroy a piece that maybe tells too many stories.
Right. Well, they have a conversation going with each other, but it's, you know, we're all so weird, but it's part of the beauty. But no, I don't want it too obvious. You can see whatever you want.
Sure.
Don't want to close the circle, keep it open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
and then, I have one more question if you'll entertain me, Hansen.
Please.
I was wondering if you could each touch on maybe the role of art education. I know, Jared, you didn't go to a traditional art school, but what has been the influence of art education upon your practice? What are the challenges of art education upon your practices as well? Speaking to that notion of maybe what Hansen brought up in terms of outsider artists or self-taught artists, who often say, you know, it's impossible to get out of the system that art schools put you within, right? So I'm just kind of curious about how education has influenced your work. Francie, yeah.
Well, my biggest mentor in my life was my high school art teacher. So arts education is, I think, one of the most important things when we're young, and then when we grow. I mean, I still think about my high school art teacher every day. So I feel very fortunate that I had that mentor in, you know, my life in the 50s and 60s. So it was a blessing, and I can't say enough and how important it is. And of course, I was an art teacher for many years, and it's the first thing that gets cut, and it's a sin.
Thank you. It is truly. We're always having to fight for that funding. Sarah or Jared, maybe the role of art education?
Well, the only thing I feel is sometimes you can tell when someone first comes out of art school.
Right.
I can sort of surmise what kind of teacher they had or what they were being told by looking at the work. And it goes through different styles and different, different times when the teachers are pushing one thing or the other. And you can sort of tell. So for me, it takes a while for a person to find their voice after they have had this huge influence. And so it's interesting, if you didn't go to art school and you didn't have those teachers, maybe you just don't have to cast that whole thing off.
Well, there you go, Jared. That's a perfect
Yeah.
place for you, right? So
Yeah, good segue, I guess. I mean, yeah, for sure. I think that, I luckily, I didn't have that baggage of, I guess a strong influence on my practice. I didn't, know what I was doing. It was called a practice for a long time, because it was just, something that I felt like, I don't know, with painting, and drawing, it's just something that I do a lot. So the interesting thing about, your question coming from your seat is that a lot of what I did in terms of educating myself with respect to art is going to museums and checking out exhibits and I think in my undergraduate education, there was, I did have some visual, in the architecture program, there are some visual art teachers who at the lower level classes, they teach some of those classes around space and form and things like that. So that's a little bit of an exposure through architecture to artworks, but it was really going to museums in terms of building on that and helping me understand certain things and understanding what I like to see out there in the world and what I liked, how I liked what people, talked about and how they would write the wall text. I really, studied all of those things in my journey. So I think it's, museums are an important place for people to acquire, knowledge in a self-taught manner. So I think that's an important part of arts education as well, outside of kind of the formal constructs.
absolutely. I think those informal learning spaces are so important. I go in every day during the summer and we have summer art camp students, and I can't help but, think about them engaging with your work, looking at your work, finding, being able to imagine when it comes to your work, and how inspiring that is, how important that is to be looking at the work of living artists, to be looking at works hanging in museums. And it is that next generation of great makers, of great creators. And so I'm so grateful to each and every one of you for gifting us your work to share with them. Hansen, any other thoughts or questions?
I think that's it. That was great. I think we've had a really good conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Our next panel is July 14th, so please join us for that. There's another selection of artists that will be participating, and the Florida Prize runs through August 14th. So please, if you have not seen the show, go and see it. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.